Why are young running backs Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, and Travis Etienne all great plays in Week 8? We tell you right now why as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. We're your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, betting, and fantasy for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst on NFL.com.
All right, Michelle, we are going to dive into the first rankings show of the week. We're going to look at the running backs and quarterbacks that you want to think about playing, maybe not playing this week, and break down the matchups. We have all 32 teams in action, no bye weeks, so a lot of players to choose from, maybe a few harder decisions, knowing that you have more players. So we'll get into that in a moment. I have to tell you, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, only at Game Time. All right, Michelle, let's dive right in. And we have a really special group of young running backs that we're really high on here. Pretty much we have them all in our top 10. You have one guy at 11, so pretty close there. But Travis Etienne, both for us behind our number one guy, is always going to be Christian McCaffrey. Travis Etienne is number 2. We have Breece Hall. I have him at 9. You have him at 5. And then Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm at 8. And you're also pretty high on him as well at 11. So let's open the show looking at these guys and why they have potential to really come through as top 12 running backs this week.
Well, with Etienne, I mean, he's just been destroying. I mean, it's mostly he's getting a ton of work, so I don't want to diminish that. But also two rushing touchdowns each of the last 3 weeks. Those aren't going to continue, right? Like, he can't score multiple times every week. But in this matchup against the Steelers, they can be run all over on. Like last week, the Rams, they should have ran more. They ran quite a lot with Freeman and Henderson, but they could have ran even more, maybe won that game. Etienne's getting so much of the work. He's just one of the elite plays moving forward, right behind Christian McCaffrey and maybe right there with Alvin Kamara with how many receptions that Derek Carr keeps giving him. But those 3 guys are this like elite right now for fantasy. And then Breece Hall, I mean, he's coming along, right? We had to miss him last week with the bye week. But those 2 games prior, his snaps are finally there. Thank you to the Jets coaches for finally getting him work. But I think every week now you just plug him in.
Yeah, I think these 2 guys are fantastic because they're now taking over their backfields, right? There's no talk of Tank Bigsby all that much anymore. He had a few looks early in the red zone, but he has actually not executed all that well while he's been on the field. And then you look at Dalvin Cook, he was washed, and we knew that. Yeah. So Breece Hall, as he's gotten healthier, you've seen Dalvin Cook fade here. So these 2 guys, I mean, right up there with Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara, as we mentioned, those guys, guys that don't need other people coming in stealing their key touches. They can stay on the field in passing situations and deliver. And you look at the matchups this week, I mean, you're right. The Steelers were pretty bad against that combination of Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman last week. You look at the Giants, they're up and down. I think you can still beat them on the ground, and we know Breece Hall can be a big factor as a receiver, and they're coming off a bye, so I like that. And then our next guy, Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, maybe they unlocked him a little bit more. I don't know if they're going to force in Craig Reynolds if it's a positive game script. Plus, the Raiders just giving up a ton of points to running backs. Even the guys that are not running well, it seems like they wake them up every single week. We saw it with Donta Foreman. The Bears running game was dormant. We saw it several weeks ago with James Cook. He went off against the Raiders, and he's not a guy that puts up a lot of numbers. So when we look at it, yeah, I think this is really good here for Gibbs to go off on Monday night.
Yeah, I love Gibbs this week. I know I have him at running back 11, but it's just because I like a lot of the other running backs. I know their workload is safe, but I do think Gibbs' workload is safe this week as well. Love his matchup. So he is a must definite play for me. And I think he has a much higher ceiling than RB11 this week. Let's talk about the guy I have ranked right behind him. It's Bijan Robinson at 12. And this is the lowest I've ranked him all year long. And I do think he's going to come back and get a big workload, right? But it's nerve wracking. You have him at RB13, but after what we saw last week, just none of it's really lining up. None of it really matches their story that I feel like they just keep changing. But apparently, he had a headache. They put him in for whatever reason at times. They gave him one carry at the end of the game for whatever reason. And now this week, he gets a hard matchup against the Titans. What's so infuriating is that in week 6, he had a season high, and I guess career high because he's a rookie, 63 snaps. So it looked like his workload was finally getting to that level of, the 8th overall running back that was taken should be. And then Arthur Smith us last week.
Yeah.
What do you do with Bijan?
Yeah. I don't know, and I have him down also partly because the matchup against Tennessee is really hard. But the good news is they could actually be playing in a good script this week, and that could help Bijan with the touches, as the Titans are going to maybe have some combination of Malik Willis and Will Levis starting this week. So I don't know if the Titans can be all that competitive. I don't know if that's great because then they're going to be like, okay, we don't need to do a lot with Robinson, and they're just going to run and Tyler Algier and Desmond Ritter and not do much in this matchup. So I have hopes for Robinson. I think he's going to be rebound spot. I think Arthur Smith, look, they're winning, so he's not in the hot seat yet, but I think there are people paying attention. This is a revenge game for Arthur Smith. He's got to put up some good offense against Mike Vrabel in this one, or it's going to look really bad here. So I think Bijan has to be lifeblood. That matchup just puts him out for me as an RB1 this week, and a little nervous from last week, probably creeping into it, but let's hope he bounces back and gets in the top 6 this week.
I do think he gets a big workload after all the drama from last week. I think Arthur Smith heard it. I don't know if he actually cares, but I do think Bijan gets a lot of work to make up for last week. So I'm happy to plug him back in. If you roster him, don't sit him just because of last week. Put him back into your lineup. It'll be okay. And then what about Jonathan Taylor? So it's been a few weeks since he's been back now. And my first reaction after that game was, okay, he's completely taken over this backfield again. Like, we're good, right? But then I looked at the snaps, and actually Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor played identical number of snaps, 35-35. Yeah. So still a 50-50 split. Do you think, though, as we move forward, JT ends up, completely taking over this backfield? They're going to stay with the split? Now, it was Taylor that got the targets. It was Taylor that got the rushing touchdown. And that's all you need, right? He could still split the work. If he's getting the touchdowns and targets, then you're going to be happy. But where do you see this backfield moving forward, especially against a pretty tough matchup against the Saints this week?
Well, I think when you look at Jonathan Taylor, and you got to think about Shane Steichen, what he did last year. You had a lot of Miles Sanders, didn't give him a lot of work in the passing game. They worked in some other guys, Kenneth Gainwell at times there for the Eagles. So I think they like to have 2 backs no matter what here. But I think Taylor is the preferred back. He just may not get as much volume that we're looking for or anticipating from him from, we know, his elite fantasy days. So they're going to work in Moss a little bit. You're right. I don't know if this is going to be the best rushing matchup for either of these guys. I think it's slowly going to shift more to Taylor as they go, and he gets back into the flow of things. We've seen it, right, with Josh Jacobs. He held out, and he's still not right. He came back and started playing, and maybe it does take a while for these guys to get going and be trusted there after they've not practiced and been around for a while. So I think the corner's turning here. I still think you have to look at him as an RB2 until we're pretty sure that Zach Moss is just a complimentary back.
Yeah, it's kind of great. They both got 18 carries last week. I mean, you're happy with 18 carries from either guy, right?
Yeah.
You would like to see more targets for Moss if you're starting him. But I do think Jonathan Taylor, we have both ranked. I have him at RB13. You have him at 14. Moss is much lower in our rankings this week. So he's just more of that low end RB2, RB3 play. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor, he's starting to look really good. We're going to get into the lower tier running backs, right? The lower RB2s, getting into some flex plays at running backs into our next segment. But first, let's talk about one of our sponsors. The show is brought to you from Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, you just download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, hopping into these running backs a little bit lower than those top guys we just talked about. I want to hit on Darrell Henderson quickly here at the top because I have him at RB19 and you have him all the way down. Where do you have all the way down at 30, right? So we'll hit on some other guys, but I want to talk about Darrell Henderson because we have a huge gap here. I was very hopeful and optimistic about the workload he got last week. And I think that just continues. Sean McVay has leaned on Darrell Henderson whenever he's needed to, right? So I just think that continues. Now, it is not the easiest of matchups. That's why I haven't done an RB19. But why are you burying him at 30?
Yeah, I don't trust the Rams actually running all that much in this game, and that's why. And they don't really throw to their backs all that much. And you look at the Cowboys defense, I think they're going to be fired up. They're going to come out, play. They had a bye last week. So they're going to come out and look to take away the run and being able to tee off on Matthew Stafford. They want that. They want the one-dimensional offense. And the Rams are okay with it because of their receivers and what they can go to work with here in this game. So that's why I think he's buried, because if they're not using him when they're trailing all that much, they really don't check down again to the backs. They've got other people they can throw to. They're in that situation, and they'll just be aggressive throwing the ball downfield or intermediate routes. That's why really I have him buried. And I also think what happens, he misses one block there, someone coming after Matthew Stafford, he misses Micah Parsons, he's gone. He's on the bench, and that's it. So I always think every time we're buying into Rams running back that isn't fully the guy here, you can slip at any time. So I'm a little bit worried about that. So, yeah, I think it's mainly based on this matchup. And again, I think the Rams will be okay, knowing that abandoning the run might be the best way to go in this game.
I think I might be a little biased because I feel like over the last couple of years, I always have Darrell Henderson, right? Like in Dynasty, or I end up picking him up before anyone else because I believe in his talent. There's always a handful of weeks where he gets the workload with the Rams and he does really well. And so I'm just going to keep sticking with him for these few weeks that he gets before Sean McVay moves on, because for whatever reason, he doesn't want to stick with him. Another running back that we have a pretty decent gap between is Kareem Hunt, who's my RB20, your RB31. He gets the Seahawks. They're like a middle of the pack defense against fantasy running backs, and they're allowing just 2.9 yards per carry to running backs, lowest in the league. But I just love that Hunt's getting used around the goal line. Somehow the Browns score a lot of points with PJ Walker. It doesn't really make sense because Walker's not good. He's not doing anything, but they keep getting in these scoring positions. Hunt has put up 2 good fantasy weeks in a row. I'm just going to keep rolling with him in this matchup where who else is going to score for this team if it's PJ Walker?
Yeah, that's my feeling about this game, though. I think the Seahawks defense is starting to play better, and it's on the road. I just think the regression of the mean is happening. They're not going to win a third straight game with PJ Walker. He's been awful. Remember how they won the game last week? They had pass interference penalties. That was their best play downfield. The Colts making
Which
mistakes.
the refs have now said they made a mistake and they shouldn't have thrown. So they just gave the Browns a free win.
And what were the Browns doing? Also, a ton of field goals, right? It was field goal after field goal after field goal in that game. So I'm not sure that they're going to get in scoring position. And I was really impressed with the Seahawks defense last week, by the way. They kind of just took it to the Cardinals all around, and it's a home game for them as well. So I think Seattle has some momentum. Again, Kareem Hunt has to score, and I'm not 100% feeling that this Browns offense is going to be on the field a lot. The Seahawks also can grind away drives and do that, and that's what they want to do a little bit. So I think that's going to play into the background. I just don't want to have too many assets in this game period. I feel like it's going to be one of those low-scoring physical games that we see in Seattle, and maybe the elements will come into play. So I just don't want a lot of exposure to this game on either side based on the situations for both teams.
And now this one's going to shock people because we have a gap between another running back, but it's not the way you would think. So with Alexander Madison, we have a decent gap between the two's rankings, but it's you who is higher on Madison this week. You have him at RB19. I am down at RB27. I'm losing hope, Vinny. I'm losing hope a little bit. It's not because I thought he looked really good as a runner against the 49ers defense. I thought he was doing his thing. They're putting in Cam Akers for like the little short receptions. And if he doesn't get those and he's not scoring any touchdowns, I mean, he still doesn't have a rushing touchdown. The Vikings still don't have a rushing touchdown at all for their team. I'm losing hope. The matchup is amazing against the Packers, allowing third most fantasy points to running backs this season. But talk me into Madison because I have him obviously in a lot of places.
Yeah, that's how you attack the Packers. That's how the Broncos did it for a lot of the game, and they were doing it, and then they somehow went away from it, and they got a tough spot, and they trailed, and they finally were able to beat the Packers. So I think the Vikings just need to be a little bit more diversified. It's, again, harder to pass on the Packers than it is to run on them. And I know this is not a running team at all. I mean, by everything they've been doing this season, but if there's a chance for maybe a positive game script to go in their way and go, or at least even with the Packers, I don't think the Packers are going to pull away from them at all. I think Vikings have a good shot to win this game on the road here as anyone. So I think they'll stay in the game. And look, it really comes down to, is Alexander Madison going to score at some point? He's been able to score receiving touchdowns, so that's been a factor. So look, I think this is factoring in that he's going to find the end zone some way, and also run for like 50 to 60 yards. So that's how I'm looking at it this week. And nothing's too crazy. You can never say that for Madison, but what you want to do is to be a little bit better here, or Cam Akers is going to cut into that work a little bit more as we go along.
Yeah, it's not like Cam Akers is good though either.
No,
so it's just one of those things.
That helps. Yeah. So we don't want that to go away from Madison either. So I mean, I think that's why I like him as a runner this week more so. And maybe we'll finally see the Vikings pop into the end zone with the running game.
Yeah, we both have Ramondre Stevenson ranked pretty similar. You have him at 21. I have him at 23. Against the Dolphins, he's a good play because he should get receptions in that game. We have Rachaad White pretty similar as well. Running back 25, running back 30. Like nothing exciting there, but Baker Mayfield did talk up his receiving work. So maybe he'll get some receptions on Thursday night football. But one guy we need to discuss because it hasn't been pretty for him. Now he has still been getting into the end zone. At least he did last week. So it hasn't been the worst plays. But Brian Robinson Jr., he has not scored very many points since week 2. Right? It's very just meh. And the only time he scores really is when he gets into the end zone. And now he gets the Eagles this week. We have him buried a bit. I have him at RB 33. You have him at RB 39, which I think both are fair rankings here. Eagles are by far the best rush defense this year, just in yards allowed and fantasy points allowed. Brian Robinson did put up 13 points against the Eagles in week 4, but I feel like the Eagles have gotten better since then. And he got into the end zone that game. That's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, he's just a weird back because he looks so good sometimes, right? He looks explosive. He looks like he can do everything he wants. He can finish well, run hard. Then he disappeared. But I think it's a symptom of the entire Commanders offense, right? I mean, Sam Howell is now running for his life, and he's taking a lot of sacks. And remember that game against the Bears? I know they were trailing, but they were fine dropping back like 55 times or whatever. So I don't know what this Commanders identity of this offense is anymore. I thought it was throwing to the middle of the field and throwing to the tight end. No, that was the case. Throwing to Curtis Samuel. No, that isn't the case. Like, who are they running? Do we think it's Brian Robinson? Do they like Antonio Gibson? I don't know each and every week. And again, this is an offense that I want to not play most weeks. And look, you look at Terry McLaurin, history against the Eagles is great. But everyone else, like, you're just hoping that it all comes together. It's just like you're throwing darts. So as frustrating as Bijan Robinson was last week, Brian Robinson, maybe an underrated story, the way he's just fallen off a cliff here. And I don't think there's no way it's going to get better in this particular game. Like, the Eagles already went to overtime once with the Commanders. They're not going to take them lightly in the second matchup in Washington.
Yeah, I agree. I'd rather play the Kareem Hunt, the Darrell Henderson than a Brian Robinson this week. And then these three guys would also be possible options over him as well because they all have good matchups. It's Gus Edwards against the Cardinals, who we saw Gus Edwards finally have a good fantasy week last week. Dameon Pierce against the Panthers. No, Pierce has not been good for fantasy, but the Panthers give up a ton of points to running backs. No team has allowed more touchdowns to running backs than the Panthers. And then Deonta Foreman, who just had 3 touchdowns last week. It's the Chargers. Which of these guys do you feel most confident throwing into your lineup this week?
Yeah, this is a tough call. I don't feel great about Dameon Pierce. Let me start there. Because the Devin Singletary hints were there that, is Dameon Pierce the guy we want in this style of zone blocking? I think it's pretty clear they're giving that indication, right? With Deonta Foreman, you're also worried about the Roschon Johnson clarity. It looks like it may actually happen this week. So to me, it is clearly Gus Edwards. He made a big play in the passing game last week, and he has the best matchup by far because I know it's a very good matchup for Pierce, but you look at Edwards, who else is touching the ball here? Not a lot. We had Keaton Mitchell show up, and he got hurt immediately. He made one play and got hurt for the Ravens. There's not a lot there, and they should be playing with the lead, much like the game in Baltimore against Detroit. So I feel like it could be a carbon copy of last week. I don't know if he'll get a big reception, but I think he finds the end zone. He runs pretty well, closes out this game. So to me, it's clearly Edwards, and he definitely has the momentum from last week as well.
Yeah, I think all of these guys are playable. Very low ceiling for a guy like Dameon Pierce, right? I agree with you, though, that Gus Edwards would be the one I would choose out of this group. Listen, if Roschon Johnson is out again, then yeah, throw in Deonta Foreman. And even if Roschon Johnson's back, I still think Foreman will be the lead back. It's just the Chargers have allowed just 3 rushing touchdowns to running backs all season. And that's where Foreman got all of his points last week, whereas those touchdowns. So that's where you worry a little bit. So I'd go with Gus Edwards out of that group. And that kind of wraps up our running back rankings for the week. And we still have quarterbacks to discuss.
Yeah, quarterbacks are always hard because there's a few guys that come through every week, and then the rest, we're just trying to figure out week to week. So we'll get into that. But first, a word from 2 more of our fine sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's very easy. You can just put together all the details you have for your job. Then you add that job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word to everyone that you're hiring. Simple tools such as screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires for leading competitors. Check it out. It's easy. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by Prize Picks, and we know that it's the easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. We always give out our Prize Picks of the week. We had a nice result Monday with the tight ends that I had with George Kittle and TJ Hawkinson. So they always have some fun things that you can look at with combinations, more or less there. And that's all you're looking at. There's projections available. You just decide if a player or combination players are going to go more or less than their prize pick stat projections. You just pick 2 to 6, and then you multiply your winnings, the more you can get right there. So it's a lot of fun to play on Prize Picks. It's easy for anyone. You can make picks in seconds with the Prize Picks app. You can also expect quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, enormous selection of players and stat types. That's all what make Prize Picks the number one daily fantasy sports app. Just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL for first deposit match up to $100. That's right. It's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. LockedOnNFL code for deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy made easy only at Prize Picks. All right, Michelle, it is time to close the show. We'll turn our attention to the quarterbacks. And yeah, it's been tough. I mean, there's some things that have been tried and true, some have not. Some guys have been up and down. One guy that had been a little down, but now he's rolling, and I have him all the way at number one this week, Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, this is the player that we wanted, right? That came out against the Lions. He did everything. He ran and scrambled. They're off script, gave us a touchdown there. He looked great as a passer. They came up throwing immediately, and he looked great throwing downfield. So I think this is what they envisioned. Keep a lot of that running game the same. Maybe not as many design runs to keep Lamar Jackson healthy, but if you see something, let him go. And then now his weapons. I mean, who knew? I mean, he got Nelson Aguilar, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews. He got all of them going in the same game last week, and this Cardinals team is terrible. So that's why I'm going with Lamar Jackson at one this week. And we saw what he can do even playing ahead and not having to throw a lot.
Yeah, Lamar has been fantastic. I mean, there's really only been one bad game from weeks 2 through 7 for him. And it was that Steelers game. He typically struggles against the Steelers, and also just his guys weren't catching any balls. It could have been
Yeah.
a fine fantasy day for him during that week. So I have him at quarterback 4. It's only because I have Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes as my top 3. I'm
Yeah.
completely fine with your QB1 ranking this week, and you're not deciding between these guys anyways, right? You only have one
Yeah.
of them. It's very doubtful you have
Yeah.
multiple. In DFS, just go with the cheapest one of the bunch because they're all fantastic. You have Justin Herbert, though, at 4. I'm at 5. Do you think we're being too nice to him? Because I mean, when you look at his fantasy numbers, they're not as bad as I have him in a couple leagues, and it just doesn't feel like he's doing enough for me. I feel like he should be doing more. Week 7 was a really bad fantasy week for him. Does he bounce back against the Bears this week?
Yeah, he's kind of a rich man's Trevor Lawrence, if you want to say it that way, where he has 1 or 2 spikes. He's he's a little bit more consistent, right? His floor is a little bit better, and his ceiling is a little higher than Trevor Lawrence, and we've seen that all year. I think both of these guys were in relation to where he took them, however, are both disappointing. I think we've talked a lot about Joe Burrow. That was pretty obvious, but when you look at Justin Herbert, yeah, he's making a lot of mistakes, and I know they go for it aggressively in 4th down, but he's turning the ball over in key spots. It's not like he's racking up the turnovers. They've actually gone down a little bit, but it just seems like they just can't finish things that are right there on the table, right? They always have this opportunity where they're down inside the 10 and like, okay, this is going to be great. Justin Herbert's going to easily pop one into the end zone. Doesn't happen, or something breaks down that, or you get some random long run by Joshua Kelly that's going to hurt his value here. So when you look at it, yeah, I don't think he's playing his best. Maybe just connecting better this offense. I think they really miss Mike Williams because that consistent deep threat. I know Josh Palmer's been great, but they need someone to stretch the field in this offense. And Austin Eckler has also been out, and he had to come out of the game last week. So I think I have him this high because of the Bears matchup. I think they're going to try to get things right in this game with their passing game. I don't think the Bears can really cover any of his key targets in this one. But let's watch that Gerald Everett injury as well. I mean, yeah, we don't want the weapons to dwindle here like they did last year for Justin Herbert. We don't want to copy that because that's exactly what happened. Where everyone got hurt around him, he wasn't 100%, and then the numbers went down with it.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too mean to Herbert. I mean,
Yeah.
especially putting him in the same sentence as Trevor Lawrence. Get out of here with that. Because it's been in 4-point pass touchdown leagues, he still scored 21, 22, 29, 23, 19, and then just 11 last week. So still really just last week was his first bad game of the season, while Trevor Lawrence has had bad weeks every single week for fantasy, right? And we'll get into Trevor Lawrence in a little bit here, but staying at the top of our rankings, let's hit on Tua Tagovailoa. You have him at quarterback 5, and I have him at quarterback 7. I do not feel confident in this ranking. I'll say that though, right? I do think he could have a much worse week than quarterback 7. He has to face the Patriots this week. He scored just 12 points against the Patriots in week 2. Now that was in New England, and now he gets to play at home. So that could change some things. But we've seen a lot of down weeks from Tua. We've had 3 big weeks and 4 down weeks. Last week, only 10 points against the Eagles defense. I don't know. I know the upside he does carry in any given week. That's why it's always hard to rank him much lower than this. But do you feel confident with him at QB5?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think I definitely always bump him up a little bit at home. You make a good point there that when he's at home, he seems just a little bit more comfortable in his element. You know, the Jalen Waddle injury, I think he'll be okay and play this week. So I'm not too worried about that right now. And Waddle really hasn't come through as much as you would like here either. So
Yeah.
it's been like as Tyreek goes, as he goes, right? That's pretty much what Tua's case. He's not going to give you anything running either. So that's hard, right? You can't just rely on that to pad his stats in any game. So I'm just hoping that he gets a couple touchdowns here, which I think should be in the works. I think the Patriots would focus on taking away the run first, and hopefully that'll open things up here with Tyreek Hill. So, yeah, it's hard because he needs more. I wish there would be just a couple more weapons in there. I know it's great to have it compressed to Hill and Waddle, but he needs a few more guys for him to produce, right? I mean, these guys that put up the big fantasy weeks, they have multiple random guys that can score touchdowns for them at any point, and namely Patrick Mahomes, right, or Josh Allen. There's always guys like that catching, or Jalen Hurts to some degree. So, yeah, let's hope it pays off here for him this week. But yeah, I think I want some more consistency from these guys. I think you have Hurts, Mahomes, and Allen delivering that, but I would like more out of some of these other guys that we drafted in the tier behind them.
Yeah, talking about consistency here, you have Joe Burrow against the 49ers as quarterback 7. I have him down just a little bit at quarterback 11. I am happy to see Joe Burrow is looking more healthy, and I am fine playing him moving forward, but I do not like this matchup whatsoever. I know the 49ers defense hasn't looked as good over the last 2 weeks, but those were 2 away games, and it's not like PJ Walker really did anything against them. It was just they're not allowing still a lot of points, right? They're allowing yards, but they're coming back home. And I think they've been embarrassed in 2 road games, had the losses. I think they come back and play super strong. And the 49ers are allowing just 11 and a half fantasy points per game this season, 2 quarterbacks, third fewest in the league. I don't know if Joe Burrow has a very high ceiling in this matchup.
Yeah, and perhaps I'm relating it to what I just saw from Kirk Cousins on Monday, but I was really surprised that the 49ers could not pressure Kirk Cousins at all. And I feel like there's some
Yeah.
similarities, of course, with these offenses with Kevin O'Connell and Zach Taylor and Sean McVay. There's type of things that they're going to look at. Joe Burrow can get rid of the ball quickly. I think you'll also see the healthiest Joe Burrow, we would think, right? Coming off the bye. And their secondary is not all that great. So that's the concern here for the 49ers. If you get time to throw against them, you can make some plays against them downfield. And I think that could happen a little bit more this week. I think you'll see a really sharp Burrow. And I think there's going to be some opportunity for garbage time, right? I think with the Bengals, they're going to be lit up a little bit, I think, defensively against the 49ers. And it could be nice back and forth between Brock Purdy and Joe Burrow. And that's what I'm looking forward to in this game. I want this game to have a lot of points. There's too much offense on the field there. And I think the Bengals, again, they're not going to force the run with Joe Mixon either. So this is a volume-based play. Like, could it come, say, could we have 350 and 2 picks? Yeah, that could happen with 3 sacks. Yeah, sure, that could happen in this game for sure. So that's why I'm ranking him that high. I think he's going to be he's just too good, too talented in a game like this with the high magnitude to just fade away in this one.
Yeah, I still have him as a playable quarterback. You can play him. I have him quarterback 11 because, like you said, I see his ceiling being 2 touchdowns. And if that's the case, then he better not have any interceptions, right? Because it's not going to
Yeah.
be all that great, but I see him finishing around quarterback 10 to 14, somewhere in there. So definitely playable. Two other guys to hit on that have road games, tough road game, or not tough, but road games. CJ Stroud against the Panthers. So a great matchup for him because they've been allowing a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks as of late. And then Kirk Cousins at the Packers. I know what Kirk Cousins just did against the 49ers, and he looked good. But Kirk Cousins on the road is completely different than Kirk Cousins at home. And Kirk Cousins on the road at Green Bay has done absolutely nothing for fantasy. So right now I have Kirk Cousins ranked rather high. I think I'm going to move him down after looking into these stats. But his last away games at Green Bay, 8 points, 10 points, 8 points. And then we saw him again at Chicago in week 6, 8 points. At the Panthers in week 4, 9 points. So like road Kirk is not good Kirk. So between these two guys, I think I much prefer CJ Stroud against it's at the Panthers, but I prefer that matchup for Stroud.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one for me. I mean, Kirk Cousins, every time I doubt him, he seems to come through. And every time that I'm like really high on him, like the Bears matchup, then he fades away. But I have them real close. We have them both real close, actually. You have an 8-9. I got 9-10. Stroud just barely ahead. So based on
Yeah,
our
I'm going to move
ranking,
Cousins down though, probably to like
yeah.
12, 13.
Okay,
He's going to
but
come down.
based on our rankings, I think we have to say we like Stroud better this week. And I really like the weapons in this one as well for Stroud, and it doesn't matter if it's Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz or Tank Dell. I think the matchups are really great. Remember, this defense is falling apart here for the Panthers. The two starting safeties are out, one corner's out. This is where you attack them. I think they'll do some things after the bye to get a little bit better against the run. So I think the Texans will come out throwing in this game. So I do like Stroud better in general. I think the matchup in general is better. I can see this actually being a sneaky game between the two rookie quarterbacks going back and forth a little bit. So that's because the Texans defense can't give it up as well. So I do kind of like CJ Stroud. I'd say a little bit ahead of Kirk Cousins this week as I have him.
And I have one more question for you to close out the show. Quickly here, who would you prefer between these three guys if you have to choose? Jordan Love versus the Vikings at home, Trevor Lawrence at Pittsburgh, or Dak Prescott at home against the Rams? If you got to choose one of these guys, who you going with?
Yeah, if I'm going to go straight down with this slave for my rankings here, this is how it is. It's 12, 13, 14 for these guys. And I have Trevor Lawrence higher. And the reason I do is I look at the Steelers and I think their single coverage ways are great for his receivers. And I think that's where I look at. And Jordan Love is just not playing well. So I think that's part of it. I think the reason he's even that high is that he's at home and it's the Vikings, and maybe he'll put up some volume based numbers. I actually do like Dak Prescott quite a bit this week. I think the Cowboys are going to realize, look, we can't really run all that effectively. We can't just be this Tony Pollard team. We got to throw a little bit, mix it up. And the tight end has a good matchup, Jake Ferguson, this week. So when you look at that, yeah, there's some opportunities. And I think you'll see a better Dak coming out of the bye as well. So keep all that in mind. These 16 buys really can change the fortunes of some of these teams coming out. So I like Dak quite a bit, but I would say I do like Lawrence. I know we don't love him, but I would say just watch Lawrence here the second half of the season. This is when he got hot last year. The schedule, it gets tougher, but in some ways it opens up as well because they're going to have to put up some points here, and it's not as easy for their defense. So I still like Lawrence. I mean, last week was a second 20-point effort. I know, Michelle, that isn't great, but I think physically, I think this could be a really nice game for Lawrence just based on the man-to-man matchups that the Steelers will create.
It's definitely not great because you're using 6-point touchdown formatting there because he has
Yeah.
yet to score more than 18 points in a 4-point touchdown passing touchdown league. So he just hasn't done anything for fantasy at all. And Steelers are allowing just 15 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. I know they give up a lot of yards, but they're very bend don't break. They cause a lot of turnovers and they don't allow a lot of touchdowns, a lot of passing touchdowns especially. So I'm off of Lawrence, of course, because I always am. And then between Dak and Love, I do much prefer Dak Prescott this week. I think Dak Prescott's a really solid play. Of course, he doesn't have a high floor, right? At any time he could just bust, but I do think he has a high ceiling. So I'm willing to play Dak Prescott in this matchup. And I would rather play Dak than Cousins this week as well. I think I'm leaning towards that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with Lawrence is I know, like, as soon as you just totally fade him, that's when he's going to explode, and that's what I don't want to do. Right? I think he's one of those guys that's very hard. I think there's a running back that's much like this. I'm going to say it's Josh Jacobs, right? That you kind of play, and it's really hard not to play this person because of the way that you watch the game and like, oh, they're getting a lot of work here and they're doing the thing, and like, but you don't get the numbers here, so it can be very frustrating. I get it. He's like QB 17 in most scoring formats now, but again, it's not looking at just we're not just looking at a half a season here. So I think the potential is there. And same thing with Justin Herbert to have big rebounds here. So I think if you're looking to maybe trade for some quarterbacks here and want a little bit of stretch run, maybe even streaming guys, I think Herbert and Lawrence, go check on their managers because I think you can get them on the cheaper side now than you can ever get them. So go ahead and do that if you need to look for some upside upgrade at quarterback. I think both of those guys have it in the second half of the season.
Yeah, maybe Herbert. I'm sorry I can't get on the Tila train. But tomorrow we'll be getting
We'll do
into
it by
wide
the end of the
receiver.
season.
Yeah.
That's my goal by the end of the season.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, tomorrow we'll be getting into wide receivers and tight ends. There's actually a ton of wide receivers that I'm willing to play tomorrow. Like as I was going through my rankings, I was like getting into the 40s and I was like, I'd still be fine playing these guys. So we'll jump into all that conversation tomorrow. I'm excited for that episode.
Yeah, it should be really good, and that's my favorite part because I love looking at all the wide receivers and the cornerback matchups and all the good stuff there and how we can break down and get the good right guys in our lineup. So we'll have that for you there, wide receiver and tight end rankings for you coming up next on Thursday. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today and every day. There's a lot of rankings and analysis coming at you here for Week 8 to give you the way to dominate your leagues, whether you're playing seasonal or daily. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.